Welcome, Life Sciences. Welcome to another exciting lesson of Life Science. What are we looking at today? Well, we're following on our series of the gaseous exchange system. We're looking how we breathe, we're looking how we bring in oxygen into the body. And remember, we've looked at the whole concept of photosynthesis, where we made the food, right? We looked at digestion, where we ate the food. We looked at cellular respiration, where we used it. And gaseous exchange, I always tell my class, is the terms and conditions. Because all of cellular respiration will only occur if I get in oxygen and if I can get rid of carbon dioxide. So we're looking at those concepts. So if I have a look, let me just get my pen going. If I have a look at this little interesting part that I put on the board at the moment, I want you to think every single time that you just breathe quietly through your nose, you are taking in half a liter of air every single time. I know for me it was quite boggling, right, because it's quite a large amount. But what are we going to focus on this lesson? We're going to actually focus on gaseous exchange. Now, if you have a look at our previous lessons, now I just want to quickly go forward. We looked at the concept of breathing. I even brought in that little model, and we could have looked at how we breathe in air. And we said that breathing was the actual physical bringing air into the lungs and taking carbon dioxide out. And that is not, right, that is not gaseous exchange. So if I give you this diagram of inhalation and exhalation, that is actually not breathing. We often use the word breathing, right, just as the whole concept of bringing air in, taking it out. But what actually happens deep inside my lungs? That is what we're going to look at today. So just before we start, so you have this idea that when we just take oxygen in and when we take oxygen out, we think we're exchanging gases, but we're not. It's just a little, all right, just a little thing that, a little bit of a change of terminology that we need. I'm going to go back to the terminology that's there. When it comes to a gaseous exchange, when it comes to life science, remember always the terms. There are a lot of new terms that you have to be able to understand, you have to be able to use. And as I always say to you, make sure you know what these terms mean. Make sure you understand them and that you are able to use them correctly. So if I say the process of breathing is inhalation, right, and exhalation, getting oxygen in and out of my lungs, what exactly would gaseous exchange be? Now, if I have a look at the concept of gaseous exchange, there's one thing that has to, all right, occur, and it's, if I have a look here, it's the primary function of the lungs involving the transfer of oxygen into the blood. Okay, now when we have a look at this concept, what has to happen is that if I have got, I'm going to draw over here, my lungs over here, the alveoli, and if I've got a blood vessel over here, gaseous exchange means that gases must exchange over a surface. Right, so when we have gaseous exchange, that the gases, there must actually be something that they cross over. So when we breathe in and when we breathe out, the gases don't change over anything. I'm just getting oxygen in and I'm taking carbon dioxide out. So when we look at the process of gaseous exchange, the oxygen and the carbon dioxide must cross over a surface. And that links back really importantly to our requirements of a gaseous exchange system. It must be moist, it must be thin, it must be permeable, or it must have a good transport. So when we go back to that section, these are all the requirements that are going to come into place. All right, so guys, let's start with this whole concept. Now, this little concept that I've put at the top here is quite important. And what do I mean by a concentration gradient? I mean that if, for example, oxygen will move, if I have a high amount of carbon or oxygen on one side, and on the other side, I have a low all right, oxygen concentration. So basically, I've got a hill. So I'm at top of the hill, and I want to get down to the bottom of the hill. And how do I do it? I always say to the kids in my class, I would rather kick you down the hill than have to push you back up the hill, because that is so much easier for me to do. So that's how oxygen and carbon dioxide are going to move. We want them to move from a high concentration to a low concentration. Okay, so how does it occur? So when I breathe air in, when I inhale, the oxygen moves into my alveoli. And remember what the alveoli is? They're a balloon. So when they move in, what does my alveoli do? It blows out, all right? It like, once it expands, the word is it just gets bigger, all right? The balloon it fills out, and we have this much larger space. So the oxygen inflates. That's the word I'm getting to. All of a sudden, I couldn't think of the word there. The oxygen moves into the alveoli. And this is the oxygen over here. Now remember, this layer over here is nice and moist, and that is where the oxygen diffuses into. Also, there is only a single layer of cells. So that is also going to make it nice and easy. Now remember this concentration gradient. So if oxygen is high on this side, there's a lot of it on this side, it will move from a high concentration to a low concentration. And that low concentration is the blood capillary that is surrounding the alveoli. So when we have oxygen over here, that's what I'm saying, the oxygen moves from the alveoli into the blood capillary. So as you can see over there, so we've just moved it from the alveoli into the blood capillary. Now, what has happened over here, and we're going to see just now, I want to explain it in a different way, is we're going to have carbon dioxide come into, right, the capillary from the lungs, but I'm going to show you that just now. So now we have the oxygen, right, that pops into here. So oxygen goes into my capillaries. How does it travel? Okay, so oxygen's in my lungs. Oxygen needs to get into the blood. Now we have a problem. Blood is water, and oxygen don't like the water at all. All right, oxygen doesn't like water, but blood is water. So now we have a problem, but we can solve it. How? Blood gets carried in taxis. All right, blood gets carried in a taxi. There's a carrier that picks it up. Now, what are those carriers? Do you see these red little discs over here? These red little discs are called red blood cells. Do you see this over here? Now, inside this red blood cell, there's an iron pigment called hemoglobin. Now, oxygen and hemoglobin are besties, all right? This is how oxygen is going to be transported. So instead of going into the blood, as the red blood cell goes through, all right, so we have this iron pigment, that's why blood is red, and oxygen and hemoglobin are like, hey dudes, we're together, and they form this compound called oxyhemoglobin, and that is how oxygen, right, is going to now go to the cells. So oxygen moved into the lungs, from the lungs into the blood, in the red blood cell, the erythrocyte, and on its way is it going to the cells. Why does it need to go to the cells? That's why I need oxygen, for cellular respiration. Okay, so here we start our first part of gaseous exchange. Now I just want you to have a look over here. When we look at this concept, I think you would have done it when we did biochemistry, right? Anemia. If you don't have iron, all right, if you don't have iron in your diet, you cannot make the iron of the red blood cells. And that could have a problem with you breathe very heavy because you're not getting the oxygen in, you're tired, you're fatigued, all right? So guys, iron, spinach, vegetables, beans, all right, all of those, soya, anything, try and get those iron levels up so that your red blood cells nice and healthy so that I can get my oxygen around. So now I go here, and now get to my cells, and I've got these little mitochondria, okay? And what happens with these mitochondria? I need oxygen. Now, if you have a look over here, we're going to see the concentration gradient again. So here my capillary comes, it's filled with oxygen. My cells, low oxygen. So what do? I move from a high concentration to a low concentration, and I move into the cells. But have a look over here. In the cells themselves, they are high carbon dioxide. Right? Carbon dioxide and oxygen don't get in. So oxygen comes in from a high to a low, and carbon dioxide, no, we can't stay together here. Carbon dioxide moves from a high concentration to a low concentration in the blood. Guys, look what we have. The arrows go in different directions. What have we just done? Gas. Oopsie, that's not supposed to be an S. Let's just erase that quickly. Otherwise, it looks like a lightning bolt. Gas exchange. Right, where have we done gas exchange now? At cell level, right, in the tissues. So the oxygen came to the cells, moved from a high to a low in the cells. The cells had undergone cellular respiration, and their carbon dioxide went from a high to a low. Now, where is the carbon dioxide? It must go back to the lungs. So what does it do? It needs to go into the blood. Now, carbon dioxide has a few more choices how it's going to be transported than the red blood cells. Red blood cells just take oxygen. So what we have over here, I want you to have a look. There are 3 different ways in which carbon dioxide can move. Now, the first way, as it is with there was a little bit with the oxygen as well, a little bit of it dissolves in the blood plasma, just a little bit. Now, this is the biggest word. I know when I wrote this on the board in my class, my kids were like, wow, ma'am, that's a really long word. Yes, it is. So when I pick up, all right, when I pick up oxygen, I take oxygen to the cells. I'm a taxi, remember? And I drop it off. So then, don't you think I must rather pick another passenger up? Yes, I do. Right? So when I drop someone off, I can pick somebody else up. So I've dropped off oxygen. Now I pick up carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide also joins with a part of the hemoglobin. Listen to this lovely long word. Carbaminohemoglobin. And you have to be able to spell it. So how's carbon dioxide traveled? Carbaminohemoglobin. Lovely big word. Now the next way, right, in which the carbon dioxide travels, and this is actually most of it, about 65% is. When the carbon dioxide comes into the blood plasma, it actually forms an acid called carbonic acid. All right. And guys, if we know something about acid, acid is not good. Because why? It changes our pH. And we know in our body, homeostasis, things must be a specific way. And and pH is one of those things that we have to keep in balance. So every time I breathe, all right, and I get oxygen and carbon dioxide especially, that means my body balance challenges. And that's quite correct. So what happens is, our body has what we call buffers, all right? Buffering. Buffering, not like when we're waiting for something to happen on the TV, or when we're waiting for something to happen on our phone. Buffering simply means that I make an acid, I add hydrogen to it, and all that I do is I change it from being an acid, which is detrimental to me, to something called bicarbonate ions. It's no longer an acid, it has a neutral pH, and there we go on our way. Okay, so now now I'm from the cells. Gaseous exchange has occurred in my tissues. I'm now carbon dioxide, and where am I going? I'm going back to the lungs. So where do we go? We go back to the alveoli. So carbon dioxide is traveling, gets to the lungs, and what do I have? I have a high concentration of carbon dioxide in my blood. So where does carbon dioxide move? From the blood capillaries into the alveoli. And remember, what was happening to the oxygen? The oxygen was moving from the alveoli to the blood. Look at my arrows again. They're in opposite directions. What am I doing? I'm exchanging gases, right? Gas exchange. So gaseous exchange is going to occur in the alveoles. I'm going to take it to the tissues. It's going to occur in the tissues, and then it's got to come back again. So each time, as I said to you, it must occur over a particular surface. Okay, guys, that's all we have time for now. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, Life Sciences. I hope you had a good break. Just get those muscles stretched, the blood going, and the oxygen coming in. Right, last segment we looked at this whole concept of what gaseous exchange is, how we get oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. The next section we're going to look at is this concept of homeostasis. Now, there's a few terms on the board here. Homeostasis has come up a lot in the sections that you have looked at. And even in the last section that I looked at, I spoke about the pH. There's this homeostasis is this constant balance. And that's why I've put the diagram up of a scale here. Is gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide, must be in balance in our body, right? We can't have too much of one or the other. Now, what happens is this, when my body gets too much carbon dioxide, and this is a concept that you must understand. It's not about the oxygen levels, okay? It's not about the oxygen levels. I'm getting the oxygen in. This is about what happens when my carbon dioxide levels, right, are too high. Now my body needs to make that plan, the balance. Look, here's my scale. My carbon dioxide is here. I need to bring my carbon dioxide levels down. Yes, I am going to use oxygen as a means, but it's not about the oxygen. Okay, that's really important. It's about the carbon dioxide. So when we look at it, remember, as I said, homeostasis is this whole thing about stability. I need to keep certain things stable. Now, I'm going to draw this little diagram on the board here, and we're going to go and work through this. And that's why I've put carbon dioxide at the top there, is that I want you to understand that it's the carbon dioxide that's going to bring about this action, not oxygen. Okay, so before I start, picture this. You guys have playing soccer, or you've gone for a run, or you've played netball, or you've played rugby, whatever. What happens afterwards, okay? I'm done all this oxygen. So what happens is I'm exercising and my body needs the energy. So what increases? So cellular respiration increases. So I need this energy, and what does an increase in cellular respiration mean? It means there's an increase in carbon dioxide. And as I said to you, carbon dioxide changes the pH of the body. I cannot have it, right? That could be detrimental to the balances. So what do? My body needs to have something in place. So what happens when these high carbon dioxide levels are in my blood? Blood rushes through the brain, specifically an area called the medulla oblongata, right? And what it is, if we look at it, it's the brain stem. It's the very bottom part of my brain. And what the medulla oblongata does is it sends two messages. So it's got a nerve, and it's two organs that it's going to trigger. The first organ, it says, it goes to the heart, all right? It goes to the heart, and it says to the heart, you need to beat faster. Right, so why would I need to beat faster? Very simply, guys, what am I going to get in? I'm going to get oxygen into my body quicker, and what am I going to get out? I want to get the carbon dioxide to my lungs quicker. So the heart must beat fast. I'm sure you guys, after you've had a lot of exercise, why is my heart beating? Right, my heart is beating to get my carbon dioxide levels down. The second organ it sends it to is my lungs. All right, here's my lungs. There we go, the trachea. Right, and what does it say to the lungs? It says you must breathe in deeper, big breath, sorry, let me go there, deeper, and you must breathe in more often. So if I breathe in deeper and I breathe in more often, what am I doing? I'm increasing my oxygen and I'm getting my carbon dioxide out faster. So when my heart starts to beat faster and when my lungs start to work, right? So what happens after I'm exercising? My heart is going, that's getting oxygen to there, all right? It's getting the carbon dioxide back to the lungs. I'm breathing in deeper, all right? I'm bringing in more oxygen. I'm breathing more out more carbon dioxide, and I'm breathing a few more times again, getting more oxygen in, but most importantly, getting more carbon dioxide out. Then after a while, what happens? When the levels equalize, when my carbon dioxide gets back to normal, what happens to my breathing? Right? My breathing gets back to normal, and what happens to my heart rate? My heart rate gets back to normal. I'm sure you can remember very often, sometimes when you train, some of you might train using your heart rate, seeing how it works. And that's how my body, all right, homeostasis, that is how my body is going to make sure, right, that I get rid of the carbon dioxide, not the oxygen. Another concept here, I don't know if you've ever tried, I don't know if it's all about the Kenyan athletes use it as well. A lot of the long distance athletes train very high up in the mountain. And the reason is that the higher you go, there's less oxygen. So your body makes a plan. It actually produces a hormone that goes to your bones and it says, produce more red blood cells. Right, you see this guy's climbing the mountain or whatever. So as soon as I go high up and my body doesn't have, right, there's not enough oxygen available, as you will see over here, my body makes a plan, homeostasis. This is when oxygen is not available. And I make the hormone makes more enzymes, all right, not more enzymes, more red blood cells, and those red blood cells, I can bring in oxygen more. You'll see very often when sports teams come and they train high up at high altitudes, which makes them fitter if they want to go and train at lower altitudes. So what is this? This is gaseous exchange. My body, shortage of oxygen, my body makes a plan in order for that to be encompassed. I have an essay type question on the board here, but I know you don't do essays, but I just want you to realize that when it comes to this, the homeostasis, there's the chance that you could have a long question. Welcome back, Life Sciences. I hope you enjoyed that break. As I always say, just get the blood flowing, get the oxygen going. It makes us more productive rather than sitting there and just taking everything in. We're looking at this whole concept of gaseous exchange, right? And when we look at gaseous exchange, the lessons that we've looked at, we actually looked at how gaseous exchange works. And that is where we exchange gases over a surface area at both the lung and the tissue area. But now we're going to come back to the concept of breathing again. And breathing is when we take air in. It's the physical process. Remember when we looked at breathing, what was involved? Our diaphragm, the muscles that moved down, and our intercostal muscles that moved out with our rib cage so that we could make the space. So, because remember, our lungs don't have muscles in it. So we rely on the diaphragm and we rely on the intercostal muscles to be able to give us space. Now we're going to look at quite a different concept now, is how, I wonder if you've ever thought, how much air do I have in my lungs? How much air, all right, do I breathe in, and how much air do I breathe out? Now again, always there's a few terms that might be new to you. Make sure you understand those terms. Make sure you know where to use them, all right? Always life science is a different language and you must be able to speak it. Now I don't know if any of you have ever had to have a breathing test, right? And basically what it means is you've got this little machine, right? It's called a spirometer. And what it tests is your lung volume. What do I mean by lung volume? It's basically how much air I can take into my lungs. And it's to see if your lungs are actually healthy. Sometimes when you're sick or you've had some kind of disease, you actually decrease the chances of you going to your lungs. So what I want you to have a look today is this whole concept of how much air do we breathe in and how much do we breathe out. All right, so guys, if we look at this spirometer, you will see over here, it's a tube, all right, linked to where we can put air in. And what you don't see, it's linked to a bit of a computer screen. Now, I've had to do one when I was much younger. I decided to go on a diving course, and I had to go and have my lungs tested, because if I wanted to go and dive underwater, right, I obviously had to make sure that my ears were in good condition and that my lungs were able to take in this oxygen, because remember, we can't breathe underwater, so I needed a tank. So what the spirometer does is you almost hyperventilate. You've got to take in as much oxygen as you can. So you have this huge big breath, you fill your lungs, and then what you have to do is you have to breathe almost everything out. And you cannot stop breathing out until literally everything air that you have right is gone. It's terrible. Okay, now obviously guys, with COVID, a lot of people are using this machine because COVID is attacking the lungs and they need to see, all right, how are they breathing? What air are they taking in, etc. Now I want to show you this graph. So what happens is most people, all right, most people have approximately 5 to 6 liters of air capacity in their lungs, right? So your lungs have this capacity to fill up, right, with at least about 5 to 6 liters. This was the part I was talking about in the beginning, was this tidal volume. And what tidal volume is you can have a look. This is your quiet breathing every single time you breathe in through your nose and out. And if you have a look at the pattern, all right, half a liter comes in, half a liter goes out, half a liter comes in. Now, all of a sudden, now that's why I said to you, you breathe in normally, and now with this machine, they ask you to take this huge big breath, and then they ask you to take it out. Now, this curve over here, all right, this curve over here is basically what they call your inspiratory reserve volume. And what they mean is you are breathing in the half a liter constantly, okay? You will at times need, as we looked at homeostasis, there will be times when your body will need more oxygen and take out more carbon dioxide. It's not going to look like this as much as this. This is usually, remember I said to you, if I take a breathe out, maybe your teacher made you do it in class. I know I sometimes, right, if you got a tank of water, I ask them to take a deep breath and I let them blow through a tube, and they've got to see how the water rises. Most people can breathe out approximately 2.5 to 3 liters. I did notice that the pupils that are fitter in my class, that are more sporty, actually can take out about 4 liters. So they're able to use a lot, and that actually goes to your fitness, etc., being able to bring in more air so that you are able to exercise more. Now I want you to have a look at this bottom one over here. Guys, your lungs cannot deflate. What do I mean by that is that you need to have approximately 1.5 liters in your lungs at any time. So what happens is, you've often seen, right, in the movies, somebody gets stabbed in the chest. Now remember, if I look at my thoracic cavity like that, how did I breathe? Everything was about air pressure. So as soon as if I get stabbed or something happens, what happens if I got a hole, somewhere thing is over there, what happens to the pressure? It deflates. And literally, my lungs actually start to deflate like a balloon. And when that starts to deflate, right, my lung collapses. It's called a pneumothorax. And my lung actually collapses, and I'm not going to get the air in. I've got to try and get the air. My lungs need to inflate again. So remember, as I said, your lungs don't totally deflate and then inflate. There's this residual volume with the lungs being all the time. Now I've put a little bit of a picture on, a bit of a question on the board here for you. And it says, Stacey's training for a marathon. She uses a spirometer, so she's find how many breaths, to find out her breathing rate and the volume of air that moves in and out with every breath. Right, so this is Stacey's breathing rate at rest. Can you see there? If we have a look over there, and this is what happens to her breathing rate when she exercises. Obviously, when we exercise, we looked at the concept just now, I need more oxygen in because I need to get more carbon dioxide out. All right, guys, if we have a look at this multiple choice question, the question says, how much more air did Stacey take in per breath whilst exercising than at rest? So let's have a look at her graph, all right? So if we put in here 2,500, right, how much was she taking in each time? The 500s. That's pretty much what we said, which was normal. Now, if we have a look here, we can see these lines are much greater volume. Which would we expect when she is exercising? So if this is 2,500, all right, this is now 3,000. This would be 3,500. How much more? Right, so this is the more. So if I look at do my maths, 2,500 to 3,500, I'm hoping that one of my answers is going to be 1,000 centimeter cubed. And I go through it. A is 500. I know it's not. B is 1,000. I say, oh, thank heavens, that is my answer. And my maths is not so bad. Right, the next question, after a few minutes of exercise, Stacey's legs began to ache. For the reason for this is because, now you see guys, we can link it to a different section. And why would her legs begin to ache? She's not getting enough oxygen. Cellular respiration, right, is turning to anaerobic respiration. And she is producing, number B, far more lactic acid. Right, the last question in this series. The spirometer trace shows that Stacey breathed more quickly and deeply during exercise than she did at rest. This is because working muscles need extra oxygen to release more what? What is the process where we take in oxygen? What do we want to release? We want to release energy, all right? That is what she needs. She needs the energy, and that will be number A. Okay, guys, that's all we have time for now. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, Life Sciences. That break again, make good use. Go and have some water, go and get the legs stretching, and most importantly, get that oxygen back into the body so the mind can work a lot more clearer. Okay, so the road that we followed so far when we've looked at the whole concept of gaseous exchange, right? We've looked at what gaseous exchange is. When I talk about gaseous exchange, we realized that it has a lot more than just, right, breathing in and breathing out. So far we've looked at the concept of how different organisms are able to get gases in and out. We looked at how the whole structure of, right, the mammal. So we've got this lungs, we've got tubes, we've got air that has to come in, it goes through all these tubes, and we look at the whole structure of the lungs. And then we looked at how we get air into and out of the body, right, called breathing. And then we also looked how oxygen and carbon dioxide, how we got it from our lungs into our body and from our body out again. And we also looked at how much we breathe. And we were staggered by the volumes, the liters of how much our lungs are actually able to do. This part, however, comes to, I won't say the unpleasant part, but we're actually going to look at what happens when our lungs or parts of our, right, gaseous exchange surface do not work as well, when we have certain diseases, right, or we have certain conditions. And remember, all of this is going to lead us to battle to breathe, right, not to breathe properly. So very often when we look at the diseases, how does it affect our ability to take oxygen in and our ability to release carbon dioxide? Again, there are a few terms on the board, right? Basically, the terms that I've put there are the different diseases or the conditions that we are going to look at. Some we're going to see are quite severe, and some are just everyday, ordinary things that just might be a little bit unpleasant for us. Now, the first disease that I've got on the board is the one you need to link with microorganisms, right? So when we get to tuberculosis or TB, right, we can link it to the first, right, part of the syllabus when we looked at this whole concept of what a microorganism is. Now, TB is a bacteria that you can see over here, all right, and how we get it, somebody who has got TB, right, the bacteria goes and sits in the lungs. Now, we have looked at it before when we looked at microorganisms, but as we said, a person that is healthy, the lungs, the bacteria is going to sit in a capsule in the lungs. But as soon as the person becomes, all right, immune suppressed, what we mean is the immune system is not working so well, the bacteria are going to start to divide. Right, now that you've looked at the whole concept of, right, what the lungs do, you need to understand that as soon as there's an infection in the lungs, what are we going to start to do? We're going to start to cough. Right? How does our body respond to these infections? It produces mucus. How do we need to get the mucus out? We start to cough. Right? And what happens what is the bacteria doing? It's destroying the lining of the cells. So when we cough, right, we might have blood. Also, remember, if my lungs are infected, that affects how much oxygen I'm coming in. So I'm tired, right? I don't have as much energy. So usually those are going to be the symptoms that we're going to see for most of the respiratory diseases. This concept of fatigue, right? That I'm tired, and the reason being I'm not getting that oxygen in. Now, the next one we look at, and some of you might have it, is what we call asthma. Right, now if we look at our tubes, I want to show you here. the lining of the tubes, not the lining of the lungs. And this is really important that you understand that, because our lungs don't have muscles. All right, if you have a look here, we've got a nice lining, and we need that lining because we need to cough. Right? We need to get things that are irritating out of our tubes. But what happens if the lining, all right, tightens? What happens if the muscle constricts? Now you also see that what might happen is, look at this mucus layer, right? It's also thicker, so the person might get asthma from being sick, right? The person might get asthma from doing too much exercises, and simply what happens is when the muscle closes, it cuts off the lining, all right? So what happens if you're an asthmatic? The tubes, remember the flow of air, the tubes must be open. As soon as it closes, guys, what am I not getting in? I'm not getting in oxygen. And if you've seen somebody who has asthma, they're trying so hard to breathe and they can't. So what you will see normally, right, is asthmatics usually have an inhaler. And what that inhaler is when they inhale, it's got little chemicals, and because we've got the tubes, it can go directly to it, and one of them will be a muscle relaxant. So, because what is the problem, right? The muscle relaxant, and that's the tubes closed. I don't know if you've ever known, some of them also have cortisone in, and that cortisone stops the inflammation. And it's not healthy if you don't have asthma to have somebody's asthmatic inhaler. There's a different kinds of inhalers. When you're sick, you can also get an inhaler, but it's different from those who have asthma. Okay, sometimes children grow out of it, right? But if you do have asthma, you'll see most of the time they'll have that inhaler with them. Oh, hay fever. Right, this is not obviously as dangerous as an asthmatic attack or tuberculosis, but what it does is it's an irritation. So for some of us, what happens is we've got little things we call rhinitis, right? That's basically a snotty nose, because if you sniff, you do sound like a rhino, right? So what happens here, you have maybe triggers, and pollen is a good trigger. And basically what happens when you have these triggers is they move into your system, all right, and you have this overreaction of things that are going to occur. So it goes into your nose, so that's when you breathe through our nose, okay, and what is going to happen here is our body is going to produce rhinitis, this whole lot of mucus. Our body is going to produce this whole lot of mucus. So what happens is we have like a blocked nose, right? But also that mucus is going to cause a bit of an irritation. So we're going to have a snotty nose, but also what it starts to happen is we start to sneeze, and we have all this itchiness, and it's just terrible. So what we usually have for it is the chemist or wherever, we have an antihistamine. Right, so what the antihistamine does is just try to get rid of all this mucus, stop the sneezing. I don't know, maybe your eyes water, but generally there's a lot of this in spring when the flowers start to produce the pollen. So nothing really serious, but if you do suffer from it, it's actually quite annoying. There's nothing worse than sneezing and a runny nose and a runny eyes, etc. All right, so when we start to look at other diseases, all right, I'm sure a lot of you have had this one, and this is called bronchitis. All right, so if we break the words down, if we look at bronchi are our tubes, all right, so when we looked at the trachea, there's the trachea, and our trachea divided into two tubes called our bronchi. Now, if we have a look at the one bronchus, two bronchi, if again we have a look at the lining, okay, we're going to see here's a nice open tube. Now, what will happen here, this is going to be a bacterial infection. And that bacterial infection, right, likes mucus. Guys, you need to understand that bacteria love our mucus linings. You will see when you have like pneumonia. Pneumonia is also bacterial infection that affects the lungs. And what does it do? It lines the mucus lining. So what happens is when the bacteria, all right, affect a normal lining, it's going to make a lot and lots of mucus. So what's going to happen is you are probably going to cough a lot, and that is why doctors often ask, is it a dry cough? Is it a wet cough? They listen to your back or to see how your lungs are breathing, because very often any kind of infection, so you've got all this mucus and it starts to, you have to cough it out, you have to get rid of it. But what can happen is that bacterial infection, if you don't treat it, and treating it usually, it's a bacteria, we can use antibiotics. If you don't treat it, that bacteria actually can go into your lungs and then it can develop pneumonia. And pneumonia is where you really battle to breathe because your lungs, you're making so much mucus. And remember, the mucus, that means oxygen has to move through all of that mucus to get to your body, and that the carbon dioxide needs to get through all that mucus. So when you breathe, you actually breathe, have difficulty breathing because of all this snot, if I have to use that word, that mucus that is accumulating in your body. But I'm sure a lot of you, if you do, as I said, bronchitis, you will have antibiotics in order to cure that. The next one is the next two are actually quite serious, all right? The first one is called emphysema, all right? And what it does, or constrictive, all right, pulmonary disease. So usually this occurs in people that have been quite heavy smokers. And if you have a look at the diagram over here, what happens is the smoking, if you're a really heavy smoker, what you actually destroy the lining of the alveoli. So here's a nice alveoli, nice and healthy. Here you've basically destroyed the lining. So if you've destroyed the lining, there is no way for the oxygen to go. And there's no cure for this. All right, they can kind of treat it. You'll see a lot of people who might have this eventually have to go on to oxygen, right? But when they breathe, it sounds almost like a death rattle. They really battle to get oxygen into their body, as I said, and there's no cure for this, right? It's usually your alveoli have been destroyed. You can't get it back again, and you are going to, people obviously die from this. I know my grandfather, right, had emphysema, and he did pass away from that. Guys, and the last one is lung cancer, right? There's a lot of irritations. We might smoke or no smokers, or have things in the air, pollution in the air. And what do these little things do? They go called carcinogens. They go into our lungs and they can cause our cells to grow mutatively, and we form tumors. That's what they are. And because our lungs are so close to our blood, what happens is, right, that cancer can go into the bloodstream, and as we know, cancer then can move to the different parts of the body. Yes, you can have chemo, radiation, or they might operate. You might be able to cure it, but as I said, when it comes to the lungs, the chances of it spreading are quite good. Okay, guys, I'm afraid that's all we have for today. Until next time, cheerio, bye.